She had been called weak, incompetent, a waste of a uniform, but when the commander placed his weapon in her trembling hands, the entire base went silent. The sun hadn't even risen over Camp Pendleton when Lieutenant Emma Hartley collapsed. For the third time that morning, her knees struck the gravel hard, palms scraping against the rocks as her lungs burned for air she couldn't catch. Around her, the other recruits kept running, their boots pounding past her head like a drumbeat of judgment. One voice rose above the others, sharp, dismissive, final, pathetic. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Instructor Garrett didn't even break stride as he said it. He was a mountain of a man, 23 years in special operations, with a reputation for breaking the weak and forging the strong. He had no patience for hesitation, no tolerance for failure. And Emma Hartley, in his eyes, was both. She pushed herself up slowly, tasting copper and dust. Her vision swam. This was the 4th week of the Special Warfare Combat Training Program, and she hadn't passed a single drill. Not the obstacle course, not the swim qualification, not the hand-to-hand combat evaluation. Each time she had come close, so close. The other instructors had leaned forward in anticipation, only to falter at the final moment. Her body would betray her. Her mind would fracture under the pressure. The whispers had started by week 2. Why is she even here? She's holding everyone back. They should cut her loose. But Emma didn't quit. Every morning she showed up before dawn. Every night she stayed late, running drills alone under the floodlights while the others slept. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't defend herself, didn't cry where they could see. She just kept showing up, even as Garrett's insults grew sharper, even as the other recruits began to avoid her like a contagion of failure. What they didn't know, what she hadn't told anyone, was that Emma Hartley had already survived something far worse than their contempt. 3 months earlier, Emma had been a combat medic in Kandahar. She had pulled 7 soldiers out of a burning Humvee after an IED strike, dragging them one by one through flames and shrapnel while enemy fire tore through the smoke above her head. She had held a 19-year-old kid's hand while he bled out, whispering promises she couldn't keep. She had watched the light leave his eyes, and something inside her had shattered so completely that even now, standing on a training field thousands of miles away, she could still feel the weight of his body going slack in her arms. The doctors called it PTSD. The nightmares came every night. The panic attacks hit without warning. Her hands shook when she held a weapon. Her breath caught when she heard loud noises. The military had offered her a medical discharge, an honorable exit, a chance to go home and heal. She had refused. Instead, she applied for the most brutal training program the Navy offered. Because if she could survive this, if she could prove to herself that she wasn't broken beyond repair, then maybe, just maybe, she could forgive herself for the one soldier she couldn't save. The day everything changed started like all the say. Others, another drill. Another failure waiting to happen. The exercise was simple in theory, a timed weapons qualification course. Each recruit would navigate a mock combat zone, identify targets, and engage with precision under pressure. It tested everything: speed, accuracy, decision-making, nerve. Emma had failed it twice already. Once because her hand shook so badly she couldn't steady her aim. Once because a sudden burst of smoke triggered a flashback so violent she dropped her weapon and froze, lost in the memory of burning metal and screaming. Garrett had pulled her aside afterward, his voice low and cold. "You're wasting my time, Hartley. You're wasting the Navy's time. If you fail again, I'm recommending your removal from the program." Now, standing at the starting line with her rifle in hand, Emma felt the weight of every gaze on her back. The other recruits had stopped talking. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The buzzer sounded. She moved. The first 2 targets went down clean. Her muscle memory kicked in. the hours of solitary practice guiding her hands even as her mind screamed at her to stop, to run, to hide. She cleared the first room, turned the corner, saw the smoke grenade someone had triggered for realism, and she froze. The world tilted. The training ground vanished, replaced by the interior of a burning vehicle. The smell of fuel and flesh, the sound of someone crying for their mother. Her finger slipped off the trigger. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't. Hartley. Commander Riker's voice cut through the fog like a blade. She hadn't even seen him arrive. He was standing 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the intensity in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment. Something else entirely. He was a legend at Pendleton, a SEAL commander who had led missions in every war zone the country had touched in the last 2 decades. Men like Garrett respected him with a reverence that bordered on worship. He didn't teach the basic courses. He observed, evaluated, and made recommendations that could end careers or launch them into the stratosphere. And he was watching Emma with an expression she couldn't read. "You see that target?" he called out, pointing to the farthest marker on the course, a small silhouette barely visible through the smoke. She nodded, still shaking. "That's the only one that matters right now, not the past. Not the memories. Just that target." He walked toward her slowly, deliberately. When he reached her, he did something no one expected. He took his own sidearm from his holster, a custom Sig Sauer that every recruit on base knew he'd carried through a dozen combat deployments, and placed it carefully in her trembling hands. The entire training ground went silent. "This weapon has been in firefights you'll never hear about," Riker said quietly. "It's saved lives, taken lives. It doesn't care about your fear, Hartley. It only cares about your intent. So tell me, what's your intent?" Emma stared at the weapon. It was heavier than her standard issue, worn in all the right places, real in a way that cut through the panic. She thought about the boy who died in her arms, about the promise she made to herself that his death wouldn't be the end of her story. "To finish," she whispered. "Then finish." He stepped back. She raised the weapon. The smoke still churned around her, but now it was just smoke. The memories still clawed at the edges of her mind, but they were just memories. She could feel the weight of Riker's trust in her hands. Solid and real. She fired. The distant target fell, then the next one, and the next. She moved through the course like water, each shot finding its mark, each step more confident than the last. When the final buzzer sounded, her time wasn't just passing. It was the second-best score of the entire session. The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett stood at the edge of the course, his expression unreadable. The other recruits stared in disbelief, and Commander Riker simply nodded once, a small gesture that carried the weight of acknowledgement from someone who truly understood. Emma handed the weapon back with steady hands. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me," Riker said. "That was all you. I just reminded you who you are." Emma Hartley graduated from the program 6 weeks later, not at the top of her class, but standing tall among peers who had learned to see her. Not as the recruit who kept failing, but as the soldier who refused to quit. She went on to serve as a combat instructor herself, specializing in helping veterans with PTSD transition back into active duty. Years later, when asked about that day, Commander Riker simply said, "Everyone's carrying something. The question isn't whether you can carry it. It's whether you're willing to keep moving forward while you do. Because strength isn't about never falling. It's about what you do when you hit the ground." And Emma Hartley, who had been called pathetic, weak, and broken, proved that sometimes the only permission you need to rise is the kind you give yourself and the quiet belief of someone who sees what you're capable of becoming. If this story moved you, drop a comment telling me what strength means to you. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories like Emma's waiting to be told. And I'd love to have you here when I share them.